Showing your recording, yes. Okay. So hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here again. For those of you who attended our event 2 weeks ago, first of all, thank you. And I hope you guys learned as much as we did here at CXC about rare metals and mining. We essentially learned that when investing in sustainable energy, we also need to think a bit further and think about the mining of those rare metals. Today, to counterbalance and give us a bit more depth, we have Assaad Razzouk. Assaad is a man with many hats. He is a CEO and co-founder of Sindicatum. It's a renewable energy company in Southeast Asia. He's also CEO of Reneum, which is a carbon credit project. He's board member of Client Earth, which is an environmental charity using the power of the law to protect people and planet. And he's also an advisory board member of Eco Business. He's also a board member of EB Impact, the Singaporean non-profit organization focused on delivering training and programs to Asia Pacific's underserved communities to generate positive, sustainable development. He, most importantly, hosts a podcast on every platform called the Clean Angry Energy Guy, which we'll recommend thoroughly, and we will be sharing the link again after the event. So today he will be giving us a bit more information and insights on what really is going on in rare metals and mining. So the session is recorded and will be posted on a platform we're currently working on. So without further ado, Assaad, your time to shine.
Thank you very much, Felix, for this lovely introduction. Good to be with you. Let me just jump right into it. So there's an incredible amount of a new type of noise directed against the renewable energy industry, as well as the general need to electrify everything. The same noise can be found directed also against the clean tech industry, and in particular, solar, wind, batteries, electric cars. You would have seen or heard a lot of the standard objections that are that seem sometimes to be everywhere around us. So years ago, solar and wind were criticized because apparently they are intermittent, because of birds, because of cost. So for example, that people against clean energy said, oh, the sun doesn't shine all the time. Oh, the wind doesn't blow all the time. Therefore, we have to have coal. We have to have gas. We have to have oil. Of course, looking at it today, it turns out we don't, because we can store renewable energy efficiently, and intermittency is actually not a problem. You can store it efficiently, it's cheaper, and it's much, much cleaner. Then, I'm sure you're familiar with the birds objection. Apparently, wind turbines must be avoided at all costs because they kill enormous amounts of birds. That was, of course, just propaganda. However, it gained traction, even in mainstream media. The number one killer of birds, for example, is cats. You know, obviously, if you think about it, followed by collisions with buildings. I haven't heard anyone complaining about buildings or cats. Of course, wind power facilities can harm birds through direct collisions, just like buildings. But the industry is actually making an effort, and it's being, by siting and operating its wind turbines properly, to avoid and mitigate those impacts, whether it's birds or the landscape or biodiversity or any other factor. The industry, this is probably the key thing I'd like you to try and take away from this conversation. The industry's DNA is about a circular economy. And it's trying very hard. So then there was yet another objection about costs, and it went something like, oh, we can't do solar and wind because they are so expensive. And that was propagated for years, not only by the oil, the gas, the coal lobbies, but also by think tanks like the International Energy Agency, which really are just a disguised version of the very same lobbying machine. But guess what? It turns out that solar and wind are much, much cheaper than coal, gas, and oil, without even taking into account any of the environmental externalities from fossil fuels, which are never priced in. So you may know, for example, that air pollution kills 7 million people a year, and that fossil fuels in general are behind the death of about 35 million people globally a year. However, that cost and all the burden on the healthcare systems and on us as citizens is not taken into account when you buy your gas at the pump to fill your car, or when you buy jet fuel for a plane. So nonetheless, even though all that cost is not taken into account, wind and solar are still cheaper. So that was the cost objection. It then mutated into more sophisticated, more subtle objections, focused on, I don't know, pick one, either bashing China, which is, oh my God, the Chinese control rare earth metals, or the Chinese control the tech for this or for that, or on waste and mining. And I've been hearing more and more about the waste and mining bit, and it goes something like this. Oh my God, what are we going to do with all those solar and all those solar panels and wind turbines and batteries at the end of their lives? Oh my God. And what about the mining practices to get the cobalt or the lithium that we need for the clean energy revolution? And that is today's ice cream flavor. And in some ways, this has become the standard go-to objection when you sift through the narrative, the negative narrative around renewables. And I suppose somewhere that's a compliment because it shows that the oil, gas, coal, and friends lobbies are actually panicking, because renewables, new clean tech, and clean energy have shown that not only are they here for real, but they're staying, and they're taking over 100% of electricity everywhere. And that is just what you, I hope, will agree with and expect once you sift through the noise. If you want to, I think, look a bit more into some of the trends that are actually really happening but are underreported out there, I highly recommend reading a report by a new style think tank called Rethink X. Just Google Rethink X electricity and you'll find it. You can see some out-of-the-box thinking about forecasts on the speed and scale of the technology-driven disruption and its implications on society. From the fact that effectively electrons, energy are going to be produced for zero and in enormous quantities in the near future, and that 100% clean electricity from a combination of solar, wind, and batteries is not only physically possible, but it's going to happen across the world. It's just a matter of time. Now, obviously, we have to do it fast, But me and my peers and the rest of the industry are doing the best that we can. And I think, we just might get there. Now, I want to describe why the new arguments against renewables, namely what I just referred to, oh my God, what are we going to do with these solar panels, these wind turbines, these batteries, etc., and the mining related to them. I want to describe why, in one word, they are bollocks. Okay? So I don't know if you've heard about a project in Australia on 30,000 acres or 12,000 hectares, 120 square kilometers, an old cattle station. There's a massive project beginning to take shape, maybe one of the most ambitious in the world, renewable energy projects in the world, to put in 22 million solar panels. Think about that for a second, 22 million solar panels to produce 10 gigawatts of solar energy. That project is going to cost 20 billion, and it's linked into a high voltage direct current undersea cable all the way from Australia through Indonesia to Singapore. It's going to begin construction in 2 years. I was with its developers actually yesterday, and it's going to start exporting clean electricity and hydrogen within, I would say, 6 or 7 years from today. And one of its headline goals is to supply 20% of Singapore's electricity, but that's just an end result as opposed to the totality of what the project is about. And it's an easy target for oil and gas dinosaurs to attack it, because they look at the 22 million solar panels and they go, what are we going to do with them? So let me start by saying two things. First, the renewables and batteries industries can, of course, always do better in terms of building a circular economy, and they try. But they're already doing not too badly at all. And in all respect, on any criteria, they're doing incredibly much better than what they're replacing. A very dirty coal, gas, and oil industry. And this brings me to my other point, which I referred to earlier. There is a fundamental difference in the DNA of clean energy companies and that of big oil, big gas, and big petrochemicals, and big coal. Our industry is actually working very hard at building a circular economy around its products. We proactively worry about what we're going to do with the solar panels, the wind turbines, the structures, and our heart and our pocketbook in that regard are in the right place. And so is the motivation across the entire breadth of these organizations. Now, on the other hand, you, just by looking all around you in any country in the world, you must know and recognize that big oil and big gas and have always destroyed and polluted at will, mostly without paying for the consequences. So whenever you hear objections about renewable energy or electrification or batteries or electric cars, keep that in mind, because that difference in DNA is absolutely critical. So let's start with solar panels. First thing to note is solar panels live for 30 years. And in the European Union, for example, the taking back of solar panels and their treatment, as well as that of the inverters and batteries, is mandated by law. It's kind of end of conversation on solar panels. You've got legislation that already requires solar panels to be recycled. And this in turn leads to high collection, high reuse, and high recycling rates. And that legislation is not unique to the European Union, and it's being deployed in more and more countries around the world as these deploy solar panels at scale. So there's a common belief out there that solar panels are not being recycled, and that is just completely wrong. In any case, it's also stupid because a solar panel, even an old solar panel, is valuable. Nobody's going to go and just throw it in a landfill. You know, you just kind of don't do that. And as I said, on top, you have legislation that forces you to do the right thing in any case. So that legislation is something that the entire industry and the NGOs around it are pushing to deploy globally, because it's a belt and braces approach to the problem. So that's kind of, I think, pretty much the end of the conversation about the sustainability of solar energy. But I'll add, nonetheless, a couple of points. The recycling efficiency right now is reaching an astonishing 96%. And I'm talking for old solar panels that may have reached the end of their life, or for solar panels that you choose to upgrade so that effectively you generate more electricity out of the same number of panels as technology progresses. Now, when did you ever hear about an oil and gas refinery talking about recycling? I mean, never. And solar recycling is pretty important, by the way, because politicians and governments understand that when you push the total value chain, you are creating more high-income jobs in clean tech and in green tech. And that is a critically important factor in how you should think about this. We create about 7 times more jobs than what we're replacing. 7 times. I mean, that's a huge differential. So we create recoverable value from the solar panels. And by the way, just current solar recycling is likely to create up to 2 billion new solar panels without the need to invest in any new raw materials. So you can see how recycling and reuse also improves mining prospects, right? Whereas obviously, again, what you're replacing does not have that feature. It's not like you can burn the oil and then reuse it again. So we're on our way to producing an enormous amount of energy, 630 gigawatts, just to pick a number, to give you a number, from reusing previously used materials. And to put that number into perspective, France today has 40 gigawatts of installed solar. So that's 15 times France. So recycling for solar panels is already doing incredibly well. And as I hope I explained, it's got an impact on the mining industry as well as a side effect of that. So then you might ask, what about wind turbines? Well, the facts are, if people look them up, that right now, today, 85% to 95% of the total mass of wind turbines can be recycled, including the steel, the copper wire, the electronics. But we still have a problem that we're trying to tackle in the wind industry, which is to do with the blades. They represent a specific technological challenge because they're manufactured with complex composite materials. And that's because you need them to withstand hurricanes or extreme cold weather. You need them to be durable and light at the same time. So they're kind of quite sophisticated fiberglass, and they're difficult to both dispose of and reuse. So, and by the way, some of them are as long as a football field, and they're also difficult, therefore, to move around. It's not like a solar panel. You can pile them up, put them on a truck, and off you go. But once again, the industry is completely on top of the problem, and there are large investments and climate tech that's being applied to solving that problem. And if you research this a bit deeper, what you'll see is that the first 100% recyclable wind turbine blades are going to hit the market soon. Of course, they'll be expensive. We're going to need to produce more of them, and then the cost will drop. So there's work being done producing 100% recyclables wind turbines, and there's separate work also being done to actually crush these blades, to turn them into products that can be used, for example, as barriers to block noise from highways and factories and things like that. In any case, there's an enormous amount of work that's going down into solving that engineering problem. And you know, we're already up to 95% and going up to 100%, and it's just a matter of, in my view, a few years. And then add to that, when you think about that problem, think that the European Union, the United States, Australia, and other countries already strictly regulate what you can throw away in a landfill. So you've got that level of control as well. So as I hope you can hear, people are trying to find solutions, and they're finding solutions so much so that in Germany, for example, the German Institute for Standardization, it's got a very long name in German, has already published an industry standard developed by experts from the wind energy industry, from the recycling industry, as well as scientists and government officials, to create kind of the first standard for how you dismantle and recycle wind turbines. Then I think my final point on wind turbines is, when you encounter a problem, you need to always try to put that problem into perspective. And here, the point is that really you're only dealing with the blades, because you've dealt with 95% of the problem already. And the blades are landfill safe. You can't throw them everywhere, but where you can throw them, they're safe. And unlike the waste from oil and gas, which is going to be with us for hundreds of years, all of the blade waste from the entire world through 2050, all of the blades from the entire world until 2050 is 0.01% of municipal solid waste. So there's another objection, I think, out the door. So yes, there are problems, but they are being solved. And let's not get distracted when somebody tries to focus us on these problems instead of the amazing superiority compared to what we are replacing. I mean, just think of your typical oil pipeline or offshore oil and gas installation, leaking methane, abandoned, polluting air, water, lungs, oceans, food chain. Just think of the plastic that you're breathing right now in every city in the world through your nose, that you're eating through the fish that you're eating, or your vegetables. I mean, it's the environmental destruction is almost impossible to describe because it's everywhere from fossil fuels. And as these businesses go bankrupt, they don't even have behind them the financial bonds in place, thanks to fossil fuel subsidies and lobbying with government and things like that to clean up their mess. So to me, that's the problem that needs to be focused on and solved, not so much what the clean energy is doing. And you know, by the way, mining is a very good example, and so is mining and recycling are both, you know, very good example of what I'm talking about. There's a co-founder of Tesla called J.B. Strobel. JB set up a company called Redwood Materials. Redwood Materials is in the business of recycling batteries, just to touch on batteries quickly. Why? Because it's abundantly clear to everybody that if you can recycle all the batteries out there, you won't need much mining, right? And right now, Redwood, which is just one startup, recycles enough batteries to power 10,000 electric cars. There are many more of these companies out there. And what the public markets and the private markets are doing finally now is funding them to scale. So expect a lot more of these businesses that are focused on recycling and reuse of solar, wind blades, batteries, to make sure that the mining impact is minimized. Why? Because that's the smart thing to do, not only from an environmental perspective, but also from a financial perspective. And there are companies similar to JB Strobel's, including his, that collect scrap from consumer electronics. And you know, one of the funny things about these objections is nobody seems to complain about mobile phones. But the waste from mobile phones is a huge global problem, right? And it doesn't have a proper solution just yet. Very little effort is actually placed into recycling phone batteries, but that is not the case for electric vehicles. There, a huge amount of effort is being placed, and those same people are now addressing legacy problems such as phone batteries. Finally, look on mining. Mining is a dirty business by definition, right? There's no way you're going to mine earth without digging a hole, right? So by definition, it is a destructive process. What we have to do is we have to minimize mining, hence the importance of recycling and reuse. And we have to ensure that the mining that we're doing is ethical and sustainable mining, which I can assure you is not the case throughout the existing mining industry, as you might have seen by one of the largest mining companies in the world, literally blowing up an Aborigines, tens of thousands of year old site in Australia by mistake, and then another one just doing the same as well in Australia. And yes, cobalt, which is used in making batteries for electric cars, comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo, which evidently has all sorts of problems, including armed conflicts and illegal mining and human rights abuses, and child labor and environmental issues. But you can't then go from there to an argument that it's unethical, therefore, to drive electric because of the cobalt used in the batteries. On the contrary, I think what you have to do is you have to ensure that the mining practices of the industry are, as I said, ethical and sustainable and don't have all these features which have featured previously in other industries. And if you look into just the power of the NGO belt around us, as well as the motivation of the people in the industry and their track record, that's what you will see. We are genuinely trying to improve mining practices from a terrible base compared to everything else that you can think of that we mine for everything else in the world, whether it's the iron ore or gold or silver or what have you. And therefore, we should not be distracted by these problems. When you hear by these arguments, when you hear these arguments, I want you to be very suspicious as to the motives of those that are making them, and to always look at them in perspective. So look, just to bring it together quickly, technologies to recycle solar panels are today everywhere around us. Some reach 96% recycling efficiency on solar and on wind as well. You can already recycle most of the total mass of wind turbine. There is an issue with the blades, but we're solving it. And batteries is the same, pretty much exact story. 90 to 95% of a lithium-ion battery right this second today can be turned into new batteries. And I don't think anybody's going to throw them away for that reason. And if they did, we're going to find it because it's environmentally and socially and financially sound. And so there is clearly no question that if you tap into natural resources, you will damage the planet. I mean, I think that goes without saying. And even if you had a fully circular economy around you, there's going to be some planetary damage. However, our collective task going forward is to bring that down from the current level, which is, say, 100 to 5. And we can do that by paying attention to how we're transitioning fossil fuels to renewable energy and building a whole circular economy around us. And not only that, there's a lot of things that go around this conversation and are highly relevant to electrification. For example, mass transit, more cycling lanes, more pedestrian areas in cities, and on and on. And in conclusion, I would say that the industry, generally speaking, is going to be the best performing by far on any ethical or sustainability or environmental or social criteria, very much because of its DNA and very much because its own people won't and can't see it other way, in any other way, given the problem that they are solving, which is climate change created and exacerbated by the burning of oil, gas, and coal that we have to just get rid of once and for all as quickly as we can. Thank you very much for bearing with me for all of these 37 minutes. And back to you, Felix.
Yes, thank you. Just prior to this talk, we were discussing, and you said about rare earth, that they're neither rare nor earth. Could you explain that?
Yeah, listen, I can try. It's a long story, okay? But rare earth are neither rare nor earth, but yes, China dominates their production. But the reason it does, okay, let's take a step back. Rare earth are relatively abundant. Actually, there are vast quantities worldwide, but they are dispersed and they are difficult to mine. Their mining is actually environmentally quite damaging, because the process of separating them into kind of commercially viable products has technical and environmental challenges. And what we, the rest of the world, did is we exported all that problem to the Chinese, who have taken it on, not because you couldn't do it in the US or Latin America or Australia or elsewhere, but because we did not want to solve the environmental challenge that's associated with them. And because, by the way, that's a tiny little industry globally worth, I don't know, $15 billion, 15, 1-5. I mean, that's less than the market capitalization, less than half the market capitalization of QuantumScape, which is a new electric vehicle SPAC, right? I mean, in the big scheme of things, rare earth is really a very small problem, which is well identified. And whether it's Australia, Latin America, North America, or Europe, or Russia for that matter, everybody can have substitute pretty quickly. All it takes is some government action and some environmental standards, but no one has bothered, right? And nobody has bothered, as I said, because it's painful to extract them. It needs a lot of labor, a lot of water, and just like the toys that you can find in a toy store or on Amazon these days, you know, there's a reason why they're all manufactured in China, because we don't want to take on the environmental challenge of producing toys or rare earth metals. But they are not a limitation on the growth of clean energy or anything else for that matter, once you actually understand what they are and what the problem associated with them is.
Okay, thank you. I think you've triggered a lot of questions. Celia, do you want to answer them?
Thank you, Assaad. I think the first question was by Lara. Lara, if you're able to ask your question, or I can read it for you.
Yes, I can ask it. Thank you. Thank you for the talk. Very interesting. I was just wondering. I heard that there had been some issues in Peru and Ecuador about balsa wood being harvested illegally for the production of the core material of the blades. I was just wondering how is the industry addressing that issue?
You mean unsafe or illegal mining practices in Peru?
It's more like deforestation for the balsa tree. I know that it's not like directly related with.
That's a whole different subject, which I'm actually completely passionate about, deforestation. It's driven by many factors. This is one of the minor ones, right? The major ones are palm oil, soy, land for cattle, right, are probably the top three. So, and generally deforestation is a problem that has kind of multiple solutions, if anybody bothered. You know, number one, if company directors of those sourcing materials that cause deforestation were personally liable, I can guarantee you that they would stop doing it. And then number two, in the countries where deforestation is occurring, if we had less Bolsonaros and less corruption, it would be far easier to address. There's only so much that the clean energy industry, you know, can do on its own without government and without corporate liability and fiduciary duty also being upgraded. I mean, I know I'm not answering the question directly, but that's a whole new few hours of conversation.
I think the next question is by me. It's about hydro energy. So I was wondering, we've talked about wind and solar, but I think hydro is kind of like the biggest, the next biggest renewable source. So I was wondering what, in your view, is the potential and the main potential and the main challenge of hydro energy?
I don't see, and the industry, we don't really see a lot of new hydro in our future, right? Hydro was an enormously destructive environmental activity that happened in the 30s and the 40s in North America and in Europe. Then, China got on the act and other countries. What's done is done. At the moment, any big hydro project which involves displacing population is pretty much impossible to do worldwide, except maybe just in China, but I personally doubt that they can do Three Gorges dam again. And the only viable hydros that you can see are run-of-the-river mini hydros, generally less than 10 megawatts, that displace nobody and don't affect the river or the fisheries. So a renewable energy, a world economy powered by 100% renewable energy, while you're absolutely right that hydro was the majority of renewable energy historically, is going to be predominantly powered by solar, wind, and batteries, as opposed to anything else, including hydro.
Okay, thank you. Lucy, I think you had a question, if you want to ask it yourself.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Assaad. A couple of questions, actually. First is about the cables. So obviously there's miles and miles and miles and miles of obsolete cable, and there will be more and more obsolete cable on the ocean floor. Are the current deals being struck for new cabling, such as the New Territories to Singapore cable, including that provision for recycling at the end of the project? That's the first question. And the second question is, how do we ensure that the profits of the exploitation of the non-rare, non-earth minerals in Africa actually reach the people that need to afford the energy transition in Africa?
On the cables first, generally speaking today, and I can't speak for everybody, generally speaking today, the environmental, social, and governance framework that is applied in the industry does have provisions for the recycling, right? So we have to incorporate the recycling typically in our costing and the waste management, with the objective being zero waste. Now, whether that, so that's at the corporate level, the developer level, whether that translates into a contractual obligation between the company and a government at the other end, I think is a matter for the parties. And I wouldn't know whether that's the case or not.
Can I just ask, because you mentioned that, it's obviously been handled wrong with the EMP, and there wasn't set aside funds for it, and there will be liquidations where the taxpayer is going to end up paying for it, or probably CCS storage companies will come in and be vultures and buy the licenses. But why then do we not push for that right now, to have the set aside to ensure that happens, so we don't just see the same old thing over again?
Well, no, you have performance bonds. I don't know whether they're sized though to the extent of the potential liability. That's not an area that I'm familiar with at that level of detail. But I agree with you, they should be.
Sorry, and then my second point about Africa and the exploitation of the resources.
Yeah. Look, that is a very big problem. It's not a small problem, and it's a historical problem, and it's embedded in the practices of multiple industries. In that context, the kind of clean energy industry is a tiny little part of the bigger issue, right? So the bigger issue, as you know, I think the entire world has pretty much completely failed to address it for several hundred years. Now, as far as the small little clean energy industry is concerned, again, all I can say is that the DNA of the industry, its policies, do not allow it to do any of that, right? So we pay fair prices for products. We because the issues there are addressed across many other businesses, and I have no idea what they're doing, you know. So in some ways, I think our industry can deal with its problems, and it can perform on kind of best of breed standards, but it cannot speak for all the other industries and all the other practices that are applied by everybody else in those countries. I mean, these are very complicated historical problems that nobody in the world has yet, I think, solved to anyone's satisfaction.
Do
right?
you think Biden's new review on sourcing ex-China is going to include that sort of provision for ensuring that the benefits get to the right people? And do you think it's the investors' responsibility to look that far down the supply chain?
Yes. No to the first question, or rather, I don't know, maybe Biden. Yes, I do think ultimately, if you want to invest according to and within environmental, social, and governance standards, yes, it is your responsibility what happens to your money. You can't just pass that responsibility to others, because you can always not invest, right? You don't have to invest in this country or that country or this project or that project. So either the projects meet some standards, then you invest, or you shouldn't invest. Because otherwise you're investing knowing some of these criteria are not going to be met.
Yeah, I'm going to, Felix is looking at me, so I'm going to hand the baton on now. But I just want to say, there's one thing that investors looking at ESG and, making the ESG assessment, that's fine. But should investors be allowing companies to exploit minerals in areas which are so desperately poor and needing assistance? It doesn't make sense to me that we're then going to be funding them to fund their energy transition in 10 years' time. So you sort of take from one hand and then, anyway, I'm going to pass on.
Yes, but before we go back to Felix, let me just say, I agree with you. ESG has way to go to actually be properly applied. And at the moment, there's a lot of people hiding behind it, almost as a con. It really is hugely disappointing how ESG is making some people look good without them actually doing good. And that's got to stop, right? There's a lot of work in that area. I think, it's a difficult podcast to do, but I might one day do a podcast on ESG. The one thing I can guarantee you is it's going to start by saying that the investor community is hiding behind fake ESG, by and large.
I can definitely help you there.
Thank you.
Sorry, Lucy, I'm just very mindful that we need to hand back the Zoom account at 11.
I've got to go as well, Felix, with my apologies.
Okay.
Why don't we do one more question?
Yeah,
Then
I
you
think
let
we
me
have
go.
guys.
So I think you said my name, Felix. Thank you very much. And thanks, Assaad. Really enjoyed the talk. Many analysts have pointed to the necessity of undersea mining for extracting a lot of these rare earth metals that we require for the green transition. We don't necessarily know the damage this could do, but I was wondering if you could comment on what the mining industry can do to ensure that if it is necessary, that it's done in the safest way possible.
Whoa, I can't. Undersea mining is an emerging and highly complex area. There's not been enough R&D gone. There are very few companies in that space. I can send you a ton of material from one of them, but it's actually, I don't think the industry is there to clearly answer this type of question. Not yet. You know, we're just simply not there yet. And frankly, you know, I mean, this mining thing is has to stop somewhere, right? I mean, because pretty soon there's not going to be anything else to mine. You know, undersea mining, I really don't know. I can tell you that it's being looked at. There's more R&D dollars going at it, but there hasn't been enough. And I don't think there's very strong pro views, very strong con views. I haven't really made up my mind in which direction I'm going to swing.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I think we can close the call now because I sadly need to go and need to hand back.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks,
Good
guys.
luck. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Assaad.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.